Troopers in Oklahoma checking on a man sitting on the side of an interstate ended up solving a 7-year-old cold case. Yep, we're digging into this man's alleged confession and the chilling new details about his attempts to confess in the past, all with Police Sergeant Kyle Shoberg. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. October 5th, 2016. That is when 19-year-old Jennifer Molloy, who went by her middle name Kylie and the nickname Smiley, was found dead in her apartment in Edmond, Oklahoma. Police say they followed up on multiple leads. They were never able to make any arrests. It was a cold case. But then, you fast forward, just now, May 3rd, 2024, almost 8 years later, Oklahoma State troopers stopped to do a welfare check on a man sitting on the side of Interstate 40. Not suspecting anything more. Troopers called Edmond police when 28-year-old Joseph Tyler Beck suddenly confessed to strangling Kylie to death all those years ago. In a Facebook post with photos of the arrest, Oklahoma Highway Patrol said, quote, "This is yet another example of how a trooper never knows exactly what he or she will encounter on the side of the road. Good job by everyone, and we hope this ultimately ends in answers for an Oklahoma family." I want to talk about Beck's alleged confession and his connection to Kylie and her family. Let me bring in right now Kyle Shoberg, sergeant with the Citrus Heights Police Department in California, co-instructor of the Patrol Survival Tactics Seminar, and host of the Shots Fired podcast, which is available on YouTube as well. Right, Kyle?
Correct. Yeah, we're on YouTube.
Yep. All right. Well, good to see you. Thanks for coming on. My first question to you is your reaction. You have this man apparently spilling this secret after more than 7 years in the most strange way possible.
Yeah, so this is actually a super complex case. And I think when people first read this, they think, well, this guy probably had all this guilt. These cops contact him on the side of the road and he just confesses to killing this girl. And then they just book him for murder. And that's just not the case. There's actually a lot that goes into these types of cases. And honestly, when you have a cold case like this, where the cops have exhausted all leads, they couldn't come up with a suspect. They may have had a lead on a particular suspect, or maybe they were even looking into this guy as a potential suspect. But if the evidence isn't there to actually charge him with that crime, they have to let time go by and hopefully develop something later on. And in this case, I think for this individual, he's sitting on the side of the road. 8 years have gone by after he's committed this heinous crime. He was really good friends with this girl. She invited him over to the apartment. And I think all that pressure and guilt was just building and building over time on this guy. And, the state troopers made that statement about you do never know who you're contacting out on the street. And that is one of the unique things about being a police officer and contacting multiple people every day out in the field, traffic stops, pet stops, you name it. It is extremely dangerous. You do not know who you're contacting. And in this case, this guy did murder a girl and he is, on the run. And you don't know if that pressure has built up so much. As soon as these cops contact these people, if they, they're thinking they're paranoid, they're thinking the cops are on to me, they know what I did, and they lash out and either commit violence towards the officer to try to get away. Well, fortunately, go ahead.
Here's the thing, though. Like look, we still don't know more details. It felt like he was just hanging out side of the road. There was a welfare check. It wasn't like, they barged down his door. They brought him in an interrogation room. You confess now. He just seemingly confessed on his own, which makes me wonder if it is that guilt element. And we'll explore this a little bit more. But in your experience, have you ever seen anything like this where somebody is picked up or somebody walks into police headquarters and just admits to something that nobody even thought that they were a part of, or something out of left field? Have you ever seen anything like that before?
I have in my 18 years, I have seen cases like that happen. It is rare, but I do agree with you. I think in this case, he's not some hardened criminal. I think he lashed out, he snapped, and that was weighing on him all this time. And so fortunately for the cops that contacted him, he decided not to lash out against them to try to then get away. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into these types of cases. As soon as this guy confesses to killing this girl, the cops are obviously probably taken off guard by that. But now that's a serious accusation. So now you got to take this person back to the police department. Now you're talking about, reading this person their Miranda rights. They have the right to not self-incriminate themselves. And so there's a lot of things that go into that. And the mere fact that someone just admits or confesses to killing somebody does not mean you get to just charge that person with that particular crime. So in this case, the officers have to go back and really do an in-depth interview with this person. And it mentions in the news that he was able to give details about the crime that was never released to the public. And that's the key thing. And with these homicides, especially if you're going to come across run into a cold case homicide, a lot of times we as law enforcement are not going to release all the details about the particular crime. That is something that we are going to hold to ourselves for an incident like this, where we don't give everything to the public because we don't want everybody to know everything about the crime,
or somebody to come out and say, "Hey, you know, I had a part in this," because there are people who are crazy and come out and say,
and
"Yeah, I'm the real killer," but that's why you have this information. I agree with you that it had to be something that only the killer would have known. I want to explore a little bit about this interview, though. So Beck does this interview with Edmond Police, and according to an affidavit, he goes into this very graphic detail when he speaks with detectives. He had apparently known Kyli for years. The two had worked together at a Subway restaurant at one point in time. And he tells the detectives, or allegedly tells the detectives, that he was attracted to Kyli, invited himself over to her apartment in 2016 to possibly sexually assault her. He claims he made these kind of romantic advances towards her. She rejects him, tells him to leave. He becomes angry. He becomes violent. He said, quote, "She wasted his time," and that's when he killed her, choked her to death, and even admits pushing his knee on her neck to make sure that she was dead, which is so disturbing. He's right now in custody at the Oklahoma County Detention Center on a first-degree murder charge. So, again, it seems that these were things that maybe investigators were looking into, and they couldn't put the pieces of the puzzle, but he might have just put those pieces of the puzzle together. I mean, what do you make of his account of what happened?
Yeah, well, I do. It's extremely disturbing. And I think a lot of times when you have crimes like that, where you have a 16-year-old girl murdered in an apartment, you know, random acts of violence like that happen far less.
I think she was 19, though. I think she was 19.
Okay, so sorry, 19 years old. So she's a teenager. So random acts of violence like that happen, you know, less than people, you know, think that they do. Usually, when you have a crime like that occur, generally speaking, you want to look at people in that close circle of either family members or close friends. And in this case, you have a coworker, they're friends. He wanted to try to, you know, have some type of romantic relationship with her. She rejects him. Now he's showing up at her apartment and ends up committing this heinous act of violence towards her. So as a cop or a detective, when you're investigating these types of crimes, that's where you have to start. Is you want to start with their most inner circle and work from there. In case in point, I'm sure that they probably looked at this guy at some point during the investigation. Unfortunately, just not able to put all the puzzle pieces together. And now, because it's 8 years later, you probably might have a whole different team of investigators who now have to interview this guy. They got to comb through all the evidence, read all the reports. They have to go back and dig through everything while this guy is making this confession. Because once you book that person in jail, you only have 72 hours to get them arraigned. And you have to have your evidence together for the district attorney to even file those charges. In homicide, it doesn't get any worse than that. So your ducks have to be in a row. You're on a very tight time window. All of those things have to be done. And just the mere confession alone just wouldn't have done it. So for him to be booked, giving those details, those detectives had to do an incredible amount of work to go back and do all this digging. It's a lot.
What a legal development, right? Chilling. That's one way to describe it. Really chilling. Makes you think that the world is sometimes not an easy place, not a safe place. You know, one of the scariest things that can happen to you is if you get injured. That's incredibly traumatic. That's a very confusing time. But that's why I want to take a minute to call out our great partner and sponsor here on Sidebar, Morgan & Morgan. This is a firm that you would want in your corner because they are specialists in this area. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, and for a reason. They win a lot. They have secured multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. They secured a $120 million verdict in one of the first personal injury trials post-pandemic. And by the way, in that case, there was a pretrial offer of just $20,000. Yeah, Morgan & Morgan, they don't settle for lowball offers. They will fight to protect your legal rights and for what you deserve in compensation. Now, one of the best things about Morgan & Morgan is how easy they make this whole process for their clients. From submitting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your whole legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. That's it. Seeing if you have a case only takes a few minutes. Oh, and also, there's no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you could start by easily submitting a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar or by dialing pound law. That's pound 529 on your phone. To be clear, as far as I know, he hasn't pled guilty yet. I mean, there's a chance that his attorney will say, I know he said these things, but I'm going to try to say that this interview was coerced or he wasn't in his right mind when he made it. There's always ways that defense attorneys can make arguments about trying to get a confession either not admitted into court or during a trial or try to have a spin on it or a narrative regarding it. But here's the part that is really disturbing is the way that he allegedly killed her. And I'm curious in your perspective, if he choked her to death, A, does that make it more difficult to track down who would have done this? Is that one of the reasons why this was a cold case, the manner in which she was killed? And B, does that tell you something that this was a crime where he was enraged? We talk about how stabbings are sometimes very intimate, but choking someone to death feels, I don't know, even maybe more personal. So those two questions, what is your take on the way that she was allegedly killed? Allegedly murdered, and also, is that a reason why this was a cold case?
Yeah, so I don't think he had any intention of really formulating a plan on how he was actually going to murder this girl. I've been to a lot of domestic violence related deaths, and usually when you have someone that's been choked, strangled, things of that nature, it's generally a close type of relationship like that, where it's very personal for the person that's committing that murder. To choke that individual, it's a personal connection. I don't think he had any intentions of trying to even cover it up. That would not really play a big factor in trying to track down. And you got touch DNA nowadays, where just you merely touching the individual, your DNA is going to be left on that person's. Unless you're wearing gloves or something of that sort. But I highly doubt he has something that calculated to try to get away from this crime. I think it was a passion thing. I think he lashed out, and it makes perfect sense, knowing the type of death that it was, and the fact that he was trying to have some type of romantic relationship with her. It all adds up.
I want your perspective on this. So, as I mentioned, Kylie had known her alleged killer for years. In fact, in an interview with News 9 in Oklahoma, Kylie's sister, Krista Stanfield, said, quote, growing up with Joseph, again, the alleged killer, he was the nicest guy. He was the sweetest guy. You would never think anything ill-mannered from him. And to know this happened and that he did this over something so stupid. And get this, Stanfield says that Beck had been reaching out to her for years, saying he wanted to meet up, talk to her. She always ignored his messages. Seems like a great thing. The last time he reached out was just last month. Johnny Molloy, Kylie's father, told News 9, the good Lord works in mysterious ways, and he's haunted that man every day, and I hope he continues to. This man has taken so much from my family, and I'm glad he's in jail, and I want justice to be served, swift and strict. Kyle, that connection is so interesting, and him allegedly trying to stay in touch with the family is bizarre.
Yeah, I actually don't think that that's too far off from the norm. When you have someone involved in a crime like this, these people want to stay connected to the family. They want to know what's going on. Like, what are the police investigating? What have they been asking the family? Does the family even think that they're onto this person to allude to the cops that this guy they think killed their daughter? So, the fact that he's reaching out to the family and wanted to remain kind of close, probably to that investigation, is actually something that happens quite often with these people, so that they can stay in tune and in touch with what is going on in this investigation. So I think that has a little bit to do. Yeah, I think that has a little bit to do with it. And the fact that I think he had such an obsession with her, probably in his mind, thinking he's dating her and all these things. And he's probably looking at her parents like, this is his girlfriend's family. She's dead. So I think there's a little bit of combination of both in his head, his sick mind, that he was a part of her. He ends up killing her. he wants to stay in touch with the family and the cops to see, kind of where this investigation is going. So I think that all kind of ties into his weird behavior.
That's a really good point to keep tabs on, because if he gets the sense that she's ignoring him or the family's ignoring him, then he might think he's a suspect. It also could be, and this is pure speculation, if he had this attraction to, Jennifer, was this an attraction that he had towards the sister as well? I don't know, purely speculating at this point, but I just think it's something that has to be explored nonetheless. So I should tell you that a judge has set Beck's bond at $10 million. A date for his next court appearance has not been set yet, but it's also my understanding in Oklahoma, you have the death penalty for first-degree murder, too, which is something to consider. Real quick, before we sign off, I mean, I know this is more of a legal question, but do you think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Oklahoma has the death penalty. Do you think this is something, the kind of case that prosecutors would move forward on and say that this is a death penalty eligible case?
Oh, absolutely. I think you have a 19-year-old girl, you've got this guy who's obsessed with her. He goes and he murders her in a horrendous way. I think they probably will. And I think the defense is probably going to be attacking, you had mentioned it earlier, his statement, was it under Miranda? And I think that's going to be the defense's biggest argument is, okay, this guy's confessed to it. He's given great detail about how the crime was committed. So that's there. But their only defense at this point is going to be, how did he give that confession? Who did he give it to? Was there more questioning after the fact, after he gave these statements from the cops? And that's really going to get scrutinized. And so as law enforcement, you got to be very cognizant of when you're talking to people and asking questions and what are people telling you? So I think that's going to be their biggest defense, but we'll see where it goes from there.
Look, the death of this young woman is a tragedy. In one sense, I hope he's telling the truth because it would give the family some sense of closure, but we'll see what happens next and if he ultimately pleads guilty. But listen, Kyle Shoberg, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. You can check out the podcast and on YouTube, Shots Fired. Hope everybody checks it out. Kyle, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.